Today we are going to analyze Plotinus' theory of emanation, which he establishes in his famous work The Enneads. Plotinus was a Greek philosopher and the founder of Neoplatonism, a school of thought that deeply influenced later Christian, Islamic, and medieval philosophy. Born in Lycopolis, Egypt, modern-day Asiat, he studied in Alexandria. Plotinus' theory of emanation is one of the most influential ideas in Western philosophy. It's a profound way of understanding how everything in existence flows from a single, ultimate source, what Plotinus calls the One. In Plotinus' cosmology, there are three principles, what he names the primal hypostases: the One, the Intellect, and the Soul. According to Plotinus, things depend upon unity to be individuals. The organization, beauty, and order of both non-living and living things in the material world cannot occur simply by themselves. Because each level of existence needs a higher degree of unity as its organizing principle, the material things need the unity of the soul. The soul needs the more intense unity of the intellect, and the intellect in return needs the unity of the One. Why does each superior hypostasis produce another? According to Plotinus, everything as existing necessarily produces of its own substance some further existent, depending on its power and the image of its existence. What becomes perfect becomes productive. The eternally perfect is eternally productive, and what it produces is also eternal, although it's inferior. Thus, says Plotinus, the first hypostasis, the One, without assent or decree or movement of any kind, produces the second hypostasis, the intellect. The intellect is the One's alike and shares many of its features, being the image of the One and the second imperfection. The intellect produces the third hypostasis, the soul. The soul is the intellect's word and act, and the intellect is the One's word and act. However, in the soul, the word is not as vivid because the soul is the intellect's image. Accordingly, the soul should contemplate the intellect, as the intellect contemplates the One. Emanation is the process through which everything flows from the One. Plotinus describes three main stages of emanation: the intellect, the soul, and the material world, all of which overflow from the One. Let's analyze this process in depth. What happens to the One in emanating the intellect, soul, and the material world? Plotinus tells us, because the One is not a material mass, it does not lessen because of the emanation. Is this emanation continuous or intermittent? The divine emanation, according to Plotinus, is continuous. The One does not bestow its gift at one moment only to leave us again. Its giving is without cessation and continuous. The divine emanation flows hierarchically, from the One to the intellect, to the soul, down to the matter. The lower the emanation reaches, the less real it gets. The entities of the lower realms are copies and imitations of the ones in the higher worlds. In this framework, because of its emanation, the One is present in the world. A presence because of which Plotinus says, quote, "I'm trying to make whatever is divine within me to rise back to whatever is divine in the universe." Because of divine permeation in the world, Plotinus considers humans as living templates manifesting divine presence. According to Plotinus, the nearer we are to the One, the more we are. Some claim that there is a problem here, namely the problem of degrees of reality. The critics say, what does Plotinus mean by the more we are? How can one exist or be a human being, more or less? Either we exist or we do not. There is no in between. Now, the underlying assumption in this objection is that Plotinus' remark concerns a binary possibility of existence. But this assumption is erroneous. Plotinus does not consider such a binary possibility when he says the nearer we are to the One, the more we are. By this remark, he seems to be saying that the nearer we are to the One, the more our potentials are reached and actualized. In the material world, we have a limited number of our potentials actualized. Rising to the soul, more of these hidden gifts would flower. This actualization increases in the intellect, in which, as Plotinus puts it, Beings are mutually inclusive and ever-present, potentials we lack here in the material world. The material world is the lowest level of emanation. This is where existence is most fragmented and imperfect. Unlike the one, which is infinite and unified, the material world is finite and full of multiplicity. Plotinus sees the material world as a reflection of higher realms, but it is a dim and distant one. The farther one gets from the one, the less perfect and real it becomes. However, even here, everything reflects some aspects of divine source. The intellect is the one's image, and the soul is the intellect's image. However, because the latter image is lower in existence than the former one, it is less vivid. The soul's higher part contemplates its maker, and doing so, according to Plotinus, it possesses the object of contemplation within itself, as its own, and it is then fully active. Its lower part manages the lower world. When the soul contemplates itself, it preserves itself. Plotinus gives an interesting simile to illustrate the relationship between the soul and the world. The cosmos, he says, is like a net thrown into the sea. Already the sea is spread out, and the net is spread within it as far as it can. Because it has no size, the soul's nature is sufficiently ample to contain the whole cosmic body in one and the same time. The cosmos extends as much as the soul goes. As the cosmos' soul, the soul flows into the tranquil mass, by which Plotinus means the corpse of the universe, from all sides, streaming into it, spreading through it until it is luminous. The soul's animating omnipresence gives value to a universe that before was no more than an inert corpse, darksome matter and non-being. It is through the power of the soul that this world of multiplicity is held within the bounds of unity. Does the soul walk into the material world? No, according to Plotinus. The soul contains individual souls. Having created the cosmos, the soul makes individual souls responsible for governing its parts. The individual souls dwell at the lowest level of the intelligible realm, and from there they contemplate the higher world and control the lower world. Plotinus gives another interesting simile to clarify individual souls and body relationships. As we have a part of our being contained in the body, we are like a man whose feet are immersed in water, while the rest of his body remains above it. Raising ourselves above the body by the part of us that is not submerged, we are by our own center, attaching ourselves to the center of all. We should be careful here though. Although Plotinus uses the term part, he does not mean that the soul is broken into smaller parts. In his cosmology, individual souls are alike and complete. The soul does not consist of parts. It ought to be everywhere the same, everywhere entire, one and present in many beings at one and the same time. Why should there be an intellect? Is the soul not enough? According to Plotinus, the soul is a changing entity. For it to exist, there must be something unchanging and prior. Also, the soul is in the sensual world. There must be an entity outside this world on which the soul depends. The intellect is the soul's begetter, form giver, prior and superior. What is the nature of the intellect? Plotinian intellect is actual and eternal, not potential or evolving. The intellect is an active seeing. It needs the one to actualize and perfect its seeing. Furthermore, unlike the soul, whose action is successive and intermittent, the intellect contains everything in an unaltering identity, in an eternal presence, having no past nor future. The intellect does not acquire thoughts, it has thoughts of its own. It thinks of itself and by itself. That is to say, it is its own thoughts. Were those thoughts a reality other than the intellect, its own reality would not be the object of its contemplation, and it would be in potency and not in act. The intellect is both the subject and the object. What is the relationship between the intellect and being? The intellect's abiding within the One constitutes its being. Its contemplating the One constitutes its being intelligence, that is, intellect. And because it abides within the One in order to see, it becomes at one and the same time intellect and being. The intellect brings being into existence by thinking it. On the other hand, by being the object of the intellect's thought, being gives intellect its thinking and existence. The intellect and being exist simultaneously and together and never apart, says Plotinus in Enneads 5. Let us now move on from this topic. Souls contemplate the One through the intellect. Plotinus says, by hypostasis is hypostasis seen. Now, given that the One is beyond the intellect, how does the intellect reach the One? There are, according to Plotinus, two capacities of intellect. To know in, if I'm pronouncing correctly, the ability to act as intellect, by which, in possession of its faculties, it beholds what is within it. And tomenon, the ability not to act as intellect, by which, inebriated, that is, intoxicated, and outside itself, it attains to what is beyond it. Therefore, the intellect contemplates the One, not as intellect that reasons, but as an intellect intoxicated by love. The intellect contains individual intellects, and it is one and many at the same time. It perceives intellect as in itself and as itself. Individual intellects existed before the world of senses. They are the archetypes of sensible things. The intellects are not in a space because they do not have magnitude. They are not prior to the intellect. They are not after it. They all subsist in themselves without end, undergoing no change or decay, and for this reason they are real. In the intellect, all is essence because real beings must exist actually, not potentially. On the other hand, sensual beings are not real. They are existentially contingent. They derive their existence from intellects. Plotinian intellects are the sources of direct and immediate knowledge. Reaching the intelligible realm, the soul contemplates the residence therein. However, acquiring knowledge in that realm differs from what the soul must suffer in the corporeal world, that is, in the material world. Here below, according to Plotinus, to get knowledge, the soul must go through the step-by-step process of discursive reason. In the intellect, the soul acquires knowledge directly and all at once. To clarify this acquisition, let us consider this example. In the past, to express themselves, instead of using letters, words, sentences, or arguments, people used what is called hieroglyphs. Generally, you can consider it shapes and symbols. Through this method of communication, instead of lengthy and wordy arguments, one could express oneself immediately and all at once. Consider this example. The Sun is a planet. It is large, round, and yellow. This planet is the source of light and heat for these stars and other planets around it. The source through which we experience the day and night and different seasons on Earth. Now, all this information can immediately be expressed by a hieroglyph, a picture that is capturable at one glance. Intellects are like hieroglyphs. Contemplating them, the soul grasps everything about them directly and all at once. According to Plotinus, the individual intellects exist mutually inclusively. They are one, yet separate. One in that the individual intellects are none other than the intellect, and separate in the sense that each individual intellect has distinct features. Multiplicity and oneness of the intellect are like those of branches of knowledge. Different branches are one under the umbrella of knowledge, yet they are distinct in that each branch has a particular domain. In this way, but with greater unity, the intellect is every one of the individual intellects and not every one of them at the same time, because each of the individual intellects is a distinct power. Intellects are not parts of the intellect. They exist in each other. Each is the whole under a particular form. The universal is implicit in the particular. They are not separated in the slightest degree from each other, says Plotinus. But that is confusing. The intellect is the totality of intellects in actuality, and each potentially. For Plotinus, the human self has different levels. Our true self dwells in the intellect. Our self extends from God to matter, since we are up above at the same time as we are down here on earth. Our true self, the self in God, is our self within the divine thought, that is, within intellect. When through contemplation we identify ourselves with this self, we identify ourselves with divine thought itself. In this world, the activities of our true selves are known when they present themselves to our senses. Otherwise, they are not communicated to the entire soul, and thus we are not conscious of them. Consciousness is a point of view, a center of perspective. In order for a psychic activity to be ours, it must be conscious. To be conscious of the higher part of ourselves, our self should coincide with consciousness. Consciousness then, and along with it ourself, is situated like a median between two zones of darkness, situated above and below it. On the one hand, the silent, unconscious life of ourself in God. On the other, the silent and unconscious life of the body. We are aware of the activities of our higher self when they present themselves to the middle part, that is, to consciousness. Thus, to be aware of the activities of the higher self, we must direct our consciousness, which acts as a mirror, upward. With this understanding, we can now grasp a puzzling passage from Plotinus. Apprehension would seem to exist or to occur when thought bends back upon itself and the activity is in a way reflected back, just as in a mirror which has a smooth, bright and still surface. When the mirror in which images of discursive thinking and of intellect are reflected is still, they are seen. But when this mirror is shattered, discursive thinking and intellect think without an image, and then there is intellection without imagination. The mirror of consciousness breaks when it has become stained, which happens when we become excessively occupied by the material world. The matter in itself is not evil, but our preoccupation with it, with the material world, is, in that it prevents the soul from reaching its true potential. Our consciousness necessitates the duality of the seer and seen, because for consciousness to work, there must be a temporal difference, no matter how small. Considered this way, consciousness is thus more of a memory than a presence. All it can give us is images. It is present in time. Our true self, however, acts differently. It acts in total presence, eternity, and perfect simplicity. And because it is in total presence, when we reach our true self, we lose self-awareness and consciousness, which intriguingly clarifies why some report getting unconscious and fainting when they receive mystical experience. As Plotinus says, consciousness tends to render more faint those very activities which it accompanies. They are purer and more active when such activities are not conscious. Therefore, the more intense an activity is, the less it is conscious. Because we are conscious beings and split into two, the only way we can raise ourselves to the spiritual life is by a kind of continuous oscillation between the disconnected levels of inner tension. That is, oscillating between the soul's unconscious life and the soul's conscious life in the material world. As discussed in Plotinian cosmology, everything comes from a transcendent supreme principle, i.e. the One. Although Plotinus names the strictly nameless, as he puts it, the One, he warns us about this usage. It would be better not to use the word one at all than to use it here in the positive sense, for only confusion could come out of it. The word is useful solely in getting the inquiry started aright, to the extent that it designates absolute simplicity. But then, even this designation must be promptly eliminated, for neither it nor any other designation can be applied to what no sound can convey, what cannot be known on any hearing. Only the contemplative knows it. And even he, should he seek to see a form, would know it not. In Plotinian cosmology, although the soul has many faculties like reason, desire, and perception, It has unity, however, it has a contingent unity. Although it is a higher existence than sense objects, and accordingly it has a greater unity than them, the soul is still subordinate to the higher existence, that is, to the intellect. Therefore, the soul is not identical to the one because of this subordination. Being has the form of being. The one is without form, even intelligible forms. Additionally, being contains all beings and thus is composite. The one is simple. Therefore, being is not identical with the one. The essence of the intellect is intellection, an activity that necessitates the duality of knower and known. The one, however, does not admit duality. Also, the one is not an intellective existence. If it were, thinking would indicate that the one was ignorant of what it was contemplating. The one does not think of itself or others. Therefore, according to Plotinus, the intellect is not identical to the one. As the one begets all things, it cannot be any of them. Neither thing, nor quality, nor quantity, nor intelligence or intellect, nor soul, not in motion, nor at rest, not in space, nor in time. It is the in itself uniform, or rather it is the without form preceding form, movement and rest, which are the characteristics of being and make being multiple. Both existence and essence are determined, and a thing that is determined is limited. The one is not limited, therefore neither existence nor essence is identical to the one. Awareness of the one comes to us neither by knowing nor by the pure thought, but by presence transcending knowledge. Not knowledge, because knowledge implies the duality of the knower and known. When the soul knows something, it loses its unity. It cannot remain simply one. The soul then misses the one and falls into number and multiplicity. If the soul sets aside knowledge, then carried along in a way by the wave of the intellect, and in a way raised on high by it, puffed up in a way, he sees suddenly without seeing how. The one is absent from nothing and from everything. It is present only to those who are prepared for it and are able to conceive it, to enter into harmony with it, to grasp and to touch it by virtue of their likeness to it. Thus will the one be seen as far as it can become an object of contemplation. It is difficult to see the one even in this contemplation. When the soul seeks to know the one in its own way, by coalescence and unification, it is prevented by that very unification from recognizing it has found the one, for it is unable to distinguish the knower and known. When we wish to speak with precision, we should not say that the one is this or that, but revolving, as it were, around it, try to express our own experience of it, now drawing nigh to it, now falling back from it as a result of the difficulties involved. Using discursive reason to speak about the one, says Plotinus, the purpose is to direct the seeker towards the vision, which is, according to him, the only way to experience that presence transcending knowledge. Plotinus writes, and I quote, "If the mind reels at this, the one being none of the things mentioned, a start yet can be made from them to contemplate it. To conceive the one, the soul should not be distracted by the external things. It should retreat inward and forget all subjective and objective. It must even forget that it is itself contemplating the one. In mystical experience, the mystic stands outside himself. He has gone beyond the contingencies of ego and is fixed upon something immovable that intimately penetrates the ego while infinitely transcending it. A plenitude in which all the fumbling potentialities of the ego are luminously fulfilled. In a nostalgic autobiographical moment, Plotinus writes, "Often after waking up to myself from the body, that is, externalizing myself in relation to all other things while entering into myself, I behold a beauty of wondrous quality, and believe then that I am most to be identified with my better part, that I enjoy the best quality of life and have become united with the divine and situated within it, actualizing myself at that level. Following this and descending from the intellect into the acts of calculative reasoning, I ask myself in bewilderment, how did I ever come down here? And how ever did my soul come to be enclosed in a body, being such as it has revealed itself to be, even while in a body? As discussed, the three primal hypostases are the soul, the intellect, and the one. They are also present in all things and individual's nature, namely soul, intellect, and the center of the soul. Plotinus says, and I quote, "Self-knowledge reveals to the soul that its natural motion is circular, as around some inner object, about the center, the point to which it owes its origin. However, this point, the center of the soul, which Plotinus famously calls, is not the principle the soul should seek. The soul should seek the principle where all centers converge. The term center is only an analogy, it should not be taken literally. In using such terms, our meaning is that in the soul and around about it exists the primordial nature that it derives its existence from the first existence, especially when entirely separated from the body. We move around the one, always, but our gaze does not remain fixed upon the one. When it does, then it is that, all discord past, we dance and inspire dance around it. The Plotinian center of the soul is the placeless point where the soul meets the one, like circles with different radii, which have the same center while they coincide. They have separate centers when they diverge. In the same way, the soul and the one converge through the center of the soul and become one intermittently in this world. They separate when the centers part ways. The intellective being unites with its object differently than the geometrical cases. The intellective thinking being is in the presence of its object by virtue of its similarity and identity, and it is united with its kindred, with nothing to separate it from them. Unlike the bodily, which are separated by spatial distance, the incorporeal are separated by their distinctions. However, when there is no distinction, they are mutually present. Thus, because one does not contain any differentiation and differences, it is always present, and we are present to it, says Plotinus, when we no longer contain differences. Here is the beautiful part of Plotinus' philosophy. The flow of existence is not one way. Even though we live in the material world, we can ascend back to the one through a journey of return. This journey involves moving inward and upward through self-reflection, contemplation, and aligning our lives with the higher truths like beauty and goodness by purifying our souls, says Plotinus, and transcending the material distractions, we reconnect with the divine source of all existence. Souls live a double life, intelligible and sensible. However, the degree to which they engage with either world differs. One who is preoccupied and allured by the material world excessively loses touch with their higher world, a deprivation which famously Plotinus calls the loss of wings or the chaining of the soul. Prisoned in the material world, the soul becomes isolated and weak. One who is disinterested in the trivial things in the material world lives a contemplative life and enjoys the intelligible world and entities therein, says Plotinus, perfect models of which the sensual entities are images and imperfections. Souls possess a nostalgia and a desire for the intelligible life and for returning to the fatherland, as Plotinus calls it. The question is, he asks, how should souls make their return? To which he himself answers, through a turning inward. Let the soul, taking its lead from memory, merely think on essential being, and its shackles are loosed and it soars, a soar inward. Tune down the sensual and listen to the voice from within. Start your ascent. You will not need to search long. Few are these steps. Take as your guide the soul. Let him who can arise withdraw into himself. Turn aside forever from the bodily beauty that was once his joy. He must not hanker after the graceful shapes that appear in bodies. but know them for copies, for traceries, for shadows, and hasten away towards that which they bespeak. Let us flee then to the beloved fatherland. One cannot initially see the inner beauty, because for the soul to see something is to be like it. To see the beauty inside, the soul should cleanse herself of the ugliness and dust she catches in the material world and decorate herself with virtue. To receive the divine light, she should shine from within. Ugliness of the soul comes from its mingling with, fusion with, collapse into the bodily and material. The soul is ugly when it is not purely self. It is the same as with gold that is mixed with earthly particles. If they are worked out, the gold is left and it is beautiful. So also the soul, separated from the desires that come to it from the body with which it has all too close a union, cleansed of the passions, washed clean of all that embodiment has daubed it with, withdrawn into itself again. At that moment, the ugliness which is foreign to the soul vanishes. In contemplation, the contemplative is like its object, as if he unites with himself. He is simple. In this experience, says Plotinus, he becomes another being. The contemplative is absorbed into the one. He gets to perfect at oneness with it. He ones with it. In this state, the contemplative is the one's image. Such experience is hardly a vision. It is a seeing of a different kind. It is a self-transcendence, a simplification, self-abandonment, a striving for union and a repose, an intentness upon confirmation. Why does the soul quit this state? Because it is still obsessed with the material world. Nevertheless, there will be a time when the soul is detached from the body and has an uninterrupted vision. One of the most important aspects of Plotinus's theory is how it reconciles multiplicity and oneness. On the one hand, all things flow from the one and share in its reality. On the other hand, existence is diverse with countless forms and expressions. Think of a tree. It has one trunk representing the unity of existence, but it branches out into countless leaves, symbolizing multiplicity. This is how Plotinus sees the universe, diverse in its forms, but united in its source. So why does Plotinus's theory of emanation matter today? First, it offers a way to see the universe as deeply interconnected. Everything from the stars to our own souls is part of the same flow of existence, emanating from a single source, a single reality, the one. Second, Plotinus bridges philosophy and spirituality. His ideas reminds us that the search for the truth isn't just intellectual, it's journey towards wholeness, unity, and the divine. And finally, his vision challenges us to look beyond the surface of life and recognize the deeper reality that underlies it all. Influenced by Plotinus's hierarchy of existence, two Muslim thinkers have developed sophisticated theories. One is Ibn Arabi's unity of existence, Wahdat al-Wujud, and the other one is Mulla Sadra's gradationist oneness of existence. I have created two separate videos for each of these two theories. If you enjoyed Plotinus's view, I think you will like watching them as well. Thank you for joining me on this exploration. How do you see the world differently after learning about the flow from the one? What implications does this theory have?